this pattern, and they're using fire conditioner. So it's a medium distance pattern, 44 feet. Fire or ice under the 10A, 10B. So it's like just the name of the particular oil conditioner. Fire is just the more typical lane conditioner that they use in Singapore oiling, Singapore National Championships. I think maybe it's a little bit more available, easier to get, but it also dries up a little bit faster, and it provides a little bit more friction because compared to the ice conditioner, from what I've heard. I believe from what I mean, I haven't actually experienced the difference between fire and ice myself, but from what I've heard is that ice would be a little bit more viscous, a little bit thicker, so it will last a little bit longer, but it also provides more skid to your bowling ball. So fire is less skid, provides more friction. That means your balls can read the lane a little bit easier. So you can see that both pattern A and pattern B are medium distance patterns, with pattern B being a little bit shorter at 42 feet, pattern A just 2 feet longer at 44. So in my opinion, pattern B is a little bit more forgiving. Let's look at the ratio. So when you look at this kind of Kegel oil patterns, right? One thing you have to pay attention to for the difficulty of, like, if you are judging how difficult or how easy this pattern is to score on, would be this ratio here. The outside ratio compared to the inner middle inside ratio. So what this means when it's 2.75 and it's 1.08 is that in the middle, obviously, is 1.08, but when you go to the outside, the difference in the ratio from here to here is the middle is 2.75 times heavier volume, where the outside middle is only 1 times the volume. So typically, I think this would also be referenced to, I believe, the oil per board, somewhere around there, volume oil total. Okay, difficult to just explain it, but just take it in simple facts is that the outside, right, is one layer of oil, and the inside in this case is 2.75 layers of oil. So the inside is obviously thicker than the outside. So this would give a little bit more allowance to bowlers, where if they miss to the inside, their ball will skid a little bit longer. If they miss to the outside, because the outside has less oil, and the ball will hook a little bit earlier, so you still have a chance for the ball to hook to the pocket. So it's a little bit more forgiving when there's this kind of a ratio. So the higher the ratio, the higher this number, the more forgiving the oil pattern, the easier it is to score. Because the more oil you have in the middle here, let's say you have a very thick layers of oil in the middle, that means if you miss to the inside, your ball will skid a lot easier, and you will have less chance of overhooking. So you still hit the pocket, or you at least still hit the head pin for maybe a cross pocket. And a cross pocket, you can still get a strike from that. But if the ratio of the inside is super flat, right? Imagine if this is 1.0, like this is totally flat, or at all, that means outside is 1, the inside is 1. If it's totally flat, then you have 0 allowance when you're at all when playing the lane. So that is a very difficult pattern, and that is very famous. The US Opens in the past, they use this very famous flat flat oiling. And it's super difficult because if you miss just a little bit, like just a hair, right, or like a tiny fraction at your target, you will like either miss the pocket or your ball will overhook and stuff like that. So bowlers have to, like the PBA bowlers that bowl on the US Open, they have to resort to very creative means to create their own miss room on the lanes by using balls with certain surface, or like then lofting the ball, right, bowling very deep inside. Those were strategies which are very unconventional, but it was what they had to do in order to get a decent score on those kind of lanes, because it was very difficult for them to get their ball to get the proper shape to hook to the pocket the way they want it for the strike that they want. Okay, so now that we established that the higher this number, generally the easier the pattern is. So you can see that pattern B is 2.75, and if you look at pattern A, it is 2.59. So pattern A is a little bit harder. And why pattern A is a little bit harder is also this. If you look at the center portion of the oil, it covers more area, right? The flat part in the center portion covers more area, where on pattern B, the center part covers less area. So there's a larger area for this slope here. So the more slope you have here, the easier it is to score on this oiling pattern, in my personal opinion. That means it's more forgiving. Then you can see that in pattern A, so this is pattern A, right? There's a slope and it levels out a bit, and then it levels out a bit, levels out a bit. Whereby in pattern B, you can see the slope is a little bit more gradual. Like it levels out, almost levels out a bit, but it almost has this very gradual slope here. So the more gradual your slope, the easier it is to score on this particular pattern. Whereby the flatter your oiling distribution, that means if you see plateaus like this, it's a little bit more difficult because your ball, when it hits this plateau, right, there'll be no allowance at all. So if you hit this area where the oil is totally flat and you miss your target, then your ball will totally go to a different place when it reaches the pins. So it'll be a lot harder to score on pattern A. Pattern A is a lot more challenging. And pattern C is actually for the open category, which, well, I mean, I'll just briefly talk about it. So if you look at this, it is a little bit more easier as well. It's 3.14 on the outside compared to the inside. But if you look at the inside is pretty broad, right? So the inside is not as broad as pattern A. I believe pattern A should be the most challenging one. Pattern C looks to be somewhat forgiving as well, but the outside looks to be really tough because the outside is totally flat and there's just a little bit of allowance in, these are the board numbers, right? On the 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 board area. Just a little bit of allowance in between these 5 boards, but the inside is totally flat, the outside is also totally flat. So even though it's 3.14, I would argue that this pattern C is also quite challenging as well, because no allowance at all on the outside and no allowance at all if you play in the middle. There's only a little bit of allowance if you play in this gradual slope area between boards 11 and 15. So this is also a pretty interesting and pretty challenging oil pattern as well for pattern C. But pattern C is only for the national, the Singapore national. So maybe I'll cover that when we play, when they telecast those masters or the MQs in maybe a later time.